do have to bootstrap, especially in the beginning.
Don't feel afraid to ask people for advice.
Use as much free stuff as you possibly can.
Think about yourself, your network, what you need to be successful.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Entrepreneurship 101 and our Bootstrapping and Alternative Sources of Funding Financing lecture. Who here needs money? Who doesn't? So this is, I just want to actually, before I start, give a shout out to our 3 satellite centers. We have NORCAT in Sudbury joining us, Innovation Factory in Hamilton, and Hull Tech joining us. So welcome. We have a little bit of a change of format tonight. Originally, we had one of our entrepreneurs in residence, John Warren, who was going to come speak on this lecture, but he unfortunately had an emergency and had to return to Norway. You know John if you've been to our workshop series, and we'll get him back next year for this lecture, as he prepared a really great presentation. But we had 3 saves so we brought in 3 entrepreneurs and one that works with entrepreneurs as well as being a former entrepreneur to come in and talk about their experiences bootstrapping. So this is the beginning of our money module, which we put at the end to keep your interest, because actually when entrepreneurs come into Mars, the first question they ask is, do you have any money for me? Because it's that important to getting your business off the ground. As part of our money module, we start with bootstrapping and we get into VC investment as for the next couple lectures. As a lot of the ventures that come to Mars really need big infusions of cash. So if you're a clean tech or you're a life sciences venture, you need huge amounts of cash to make it through regulatory or to get what you need built. But for the majority of entrepreneurs, and I know we have Main Street entrepreneurs coming to Entrepreneurship 101 or social ventures, bootstrapping is the majority. Depends on what you read. It's 94%, 98% of companies will have to bootstrap, and even companies that get investment later start out bootstrapping. So before I bring up our panelists and introduce you to them and their companies, I just wanted to start with a couple slides on what bootstrapping and alternative sources of funding means. So you've validated your idea, you've done customer development, you've tested your business model, you've gone out and talked to customers and made sure that they are willing to buy what you're selling, and you're solving a bleeding neck wound problem for them. And now you're ready to launch your new startup. So of course you need money. And many entrepreneurs think they need lots of money. It's debatable how much money you need. I actually have some great research in a couple slides to talk about the fact that you might need less money than you think. So Bootstrappers Hall of Fame. This is a slide stolen from last year's bootstrapping lecture, which was actually done by Charles Plant, who spoke last week. He does a fantastic job. It's online if you want to check it out. You might be surprised that all these companies started out being bootstrapped. Well, the reality is most companies, except for Mike, who's coming up, he said he got investment out of the gate, but most people do have to bootstrap, especially in the beginning. And probably the most famous company that had to bootstrap in the beginning is the most well-known company in the world, Apple. And I'm going to read a little bit of a story about how Apple bootstrapped, because Steve Jobs is infinitely interesting, and he did an interesting thing in the beginning. So he had met, you probably know mostly the story, he had met Steve Wozniak. Wozniak was the guy that loved to tinker with the technology. He had a new circuit board, he was making this new computer, and Steve Jobs really thought saw this thing and said, there's tremendous commercial potential here. So neither one of them was sitting on a mountain of money. So how did they get those first computers built? So here's the story. Jobs approached a local computer store, the Byte Shop, who said that they would be interested in the machine, but only if it came fully assembled. The owner, Paul Terrell, went further, saying he would order 50 of the machines and pay US $500 each on delivery. Jobs then took the purchase order that he'd been given from the Byte Shop to Kramer Electronics, which was a national electronic parts distributor, and he ordered the components he needed to assemble the Apple I computer. The local credit manager asked Jobs how he was going to pay for the parts, and he replied, I have this purchase order from the Byte Shop chain of computer stores for 50 of my computers, and the payment terms are COD, cash on delivery. If you can give me the parts on a net 30-day terms, I can build and deliver the computers in that time frame, collect my money from Terrell at the Byte Shop, and pay you. Well, like any good business owner, of course, he has to check this out. So the credit manager called Paul Terrell of the Byte Shop, who was attending a conference, and he verified the validity of the purchase order. Amazed at the tenacity of Jobs, Terrell assured the credit manager if the computers actually showed up in his stores, jobs would indeed be paid and they would have more than enough money to pay for the parts order. So the two Steves and their small crew, they spent day and night building and testing the computers, and they delivered them to Terrell on time to pay his suppliers and have a tidy profit left over for their celebration and next order. They had found a way to finance their soon-to-be multi-million-dollar company without giving away one share of stock or ownership. So later, you probably know the story, they did take, within the year, $250,000 worth of angel investment, and later, near 1980, they had 3 rounds of VC investment. But to get that first, their product into the stores first, they did what's called bootstrapping. So what is bootstrapping? Bootstrapping is kind of an interesting term because it means literally to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, which is sort of like to be tough and to be smart. It's basically starting a business with little capital or formal investment. It means the majority of entrepreneurs, they use their own finances, savings. You hear horror stories and wins of people using their credit cards, loans, or the infinite 3 Fs, the family, friends, friends, family, and fools. A lot of startups will sell their time or their expertise. There'll be consultants. This works often in software businesses, for example, where you can help people solve problems and use the funds that you're getting from that work to fund product development. It also means selling an early product to fund your company development. So you hear a lot about the lean startup and get something out there fast. That's bootstrapping. And it also means leveraging other sources of funding. So we started with the hot tips video from the funding portal. We actually have the funding portal on the Mars site, and I'll talk a little bit about it as well. It's a great resource to find the many, many government grants that are out there, but it's a bit of a jungle to find the right one. And the new, very hot way to get funding, crowdfunding. We have a resident on our panel who's done 2 rounds of crowdfunding, so we're pretty excited to hear what she has to say about that. Why is it so important? Well, one thing is it's the only option for many companies. Companies that won't grow quickly, or they won't ever be really investable from VCs with a really big ROI or return on investment. Even companies that will be investable later, they have to start out this way. They may need to reach certain milestones or get a certain amount of traction before investors will even look at them. And some companies actually choose to bootstrap to maintain control or full ownership over their companies. I know some entrepreneurs that have been funded from VCs in the past and swear they will never do it again. So they are convinced that the next business they make or the business they're working in now will be bootstrapped because they want that control. It depends on what your reasons are for being an entrepreneur. If you want control, maybe getting investors to own shares and have too much say in your business is not for you. Another thing is it really forces you to focus on priorities and leverage what you have, whether it be time, money, expertise. We all saw what happened around 2001 when pets.com and some of these crazy ideas were given tons and tons of money. They would set up big offices with the best furniture and all these things, and there was no business model there. So when you have no money, it forces you to make really smart choices, which in the end, maybe is better for some companies as they're still developing their business model, and rather than launching with the first one with lots of money, they're able to adapt for their audience. So what's interesting, you probably know Inc. magazine. It's a great magazine for entrepreneurs. They have what's something called Inc. 500, which is a list of the top 500 companies, and they do research on them every year. This is from one of their studies. They found that startup capital is not the leading predictor of success. So we would think that if you were given a lot of money, you'd grow really fast and you'd be very successful. It turns out it's not true. So companies started with less than $1,000 are likely to be as profitable as those starting with over $100,000. Isn't that crazy? Companies launched with less than $10,000 achieved almost as rapid a growth rate as those that were loaded with startup capital before the company's first sale. So it turns out you can still be profitable if you start with a lot of money, and you can still grow fast, which kind of goes against our sensibilities about entrepreneurship. But they did find that the size of the company was affected. So if companies had less than $100,000 seed capital, they had more than $100,000 of seed capital. They had 150 employees on average and 21 million in revenue. Under $1,000 seed capital, they had only 56 employees and $13 million in sales. So don't despair if you don't have a lot of money. I think also in the Inc. 500, they said the majority of companies are started, like 96% on less than $10,000. So tips for staying lean, we're gonna get some tips from our entrepreneur panel that I'm gonna bring up shortly. These are just mostly for you to look at later because they're obviously quite small and you probably can't see. Keep overhead low. So you wanna share office space, you wanna work from home as long as you can, seems like common sense. Use free technology tools, QuickBooks, WordPress to build websites, and wherever you can, you want to have low fixed costs and keep your costs variable, just to give you the option as your business might contract and expand. You want to leverage relationships, so tap your network for discounted services from lawyers, accountants, deferred fees, like what Steve Jobs did, where he made sure he had the money coming in and made somebody see that he had this cash on demand order and it was going to come. Use advisors and mentors to leverage relationships. Find employees who will share the risk and upside wherever possible. This is very challenging, actually. Leverage suppliers to only get paid when you make money. That's what Jobs did. You could also find a beta customer and get paid product development. If it's a burning need, they might actually help fund you to build that solution. Do-it-yourself marketing and hiring. Interns can help, contractors, so that again you can only purchase what you're getting work for. You're not locking in. A big mistake startups often make is they hire this big sales team, but it takes a while for sales to scale up before you need a team, so you're wasting money unless you need full-time sales staff. And another tactic I've seen about is to pay commission only for salespeople. You really need a certain type of salesperson to do that. They definitely know they can sell, and they're usually pretty experienced, but if that's all you can afford in the beginning, that works. Money management, we always say this, that people will quit their jobs and go to the bank for a credit line, and the bank will say, no thanks. So you always want to keep your credit lines open if you have a job, in case you ever quit your job and want to start a company. You could look for service opportunities related to your business. That's, again, exchanging your time and your expertise for some money to self-fund. And we see this a lot, is to bootstrap, you need to focus on sales very early as possible, not just product development. A lot of the entrepreneurs we work with, they're technology entrepreneurs, they love what they're building, and we have to really force them to get out and talk to customers, start selling, because you can tinker with the technology for a long time. And another tip for bootstrapping is picking the right business. A business that has really long selling cycles, you're going to need a strategy to get you to that first sale, which could be years away. If you have the option, pick businesses with short selling cycles, recurring revenue, things that are subscription or paid monthly can help you bootstrap. So we mentioned the funding portal. It is a search tool that's on marsdd.com/funding, done by a separate organization called the Funding Portal. There's $30 billion on there in 4,500 government funding programs, federal, provincial, municipal. About $26 billion is grants and $4 billion is tax credits. I think the trend for governments is they're doing more and more grants rather than tax credits because the ROI is higher. You can see some of the average grant sizes, and about 30% of the recipients are based in Ontario, and the top sectors are manufacturing, media, and tech. So definitely check that out, and check it out frequently, because the thing about government grants is they pop up and go away. It's a changing landscape. So crowdfunding is another alternative source of financing. It's a very exciting new method because it takes out the middleman of investor. So some of the pros I think everybody knows what crowdfunding is. It's when you go to Indiegogo or Kickstarter, you put something online, you're getting small donations from a wide pool of people. I say donations because sometimes they are a donation or they're a trade for a reward. Where equity is not allowed yet in Canada. It is actually in the UK, so it may be coming. Kickstarter just passed $1 billion in pledges, and it just came to Canada in September 2013, I believe. In Canada, we've had 1,400 projects, but you can see the difference between pledges and what's actually raised. So $44 million in pledges in Canada, raising only $14 million. So there's a lot that don't go through to completion because they have to reach a certain level of donations before they happen. So some of the pros of crowdfunding, they validate your idea. They offer, especially arts and nonprofits, an opportunity to get investment when they're sort of non-investable entities. They're an opportunity for pre-sales or for getting money to build your first product. They can build market awareness. They're great for publicity. And for the entrepreneurs that don't want equity, there's no equity involved yet. A lot of people think they are much easier than they are. They are not free money. You generally don't make any profit on them. You have to be very careful how you cost it out. And they're a lot of work. Like that first week is so important. That first day, some people would say, getting the word out and getting the hype and the donations going. Some of the cons, lots of failed campaigns. Because it's so accessible, there's lots of people that try. You can launch too early. You can think that this is the way to get money and it can fail, and that can have an impact on your team and their morale and yourself. And some entrepreneurs underestimate the cost of fulfillment. It's a bit scary for some technology entrepreneurs because they may not be able to deliver the product on time and the cost that they've sort of promised. So there's been some lawsuits in the US about that. Getting the price wrong is also something that can be devastating. Too low, you're going to have money out of your own pocket to fulfill those orders. Too high, and you might not have enough donations or funders. And the wrong product. It works really well, I think, for arts and fashion and different types of products, not so much for really, really complicated ones necessarily. So we did actually have Brian Meese from Rocket Hub, which is a crowdfunding platform, and Amy Lesnick from Indiegogo to come and talk to Mars in our best practices series. So I just recommend that you check out these videos online if you want to learn more about that, because it is really a hot area and there's a lot of information out there to help you. So with that, I would like to introduce our panel. We'll bring them up. Joanna, Mark, and Mike, come on up. So we'll start by introducing Joanna. So Joanna Griffiths is the founder and CEO of Knixwear. She's the chief Knixpert, aka founder and CEO. Knixwear is a high-tech women's underwear brand. She has over 7 years of marketing and public relations experience. She's worked for Universal Music, the Toronto International Film Festival, and the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. She holds an MBA with distinction from INSEAD, where she won both the Women's Award for Entrepreneurship and the Business Venture Competition for Knixwear, securing $20,000 to begin the business. She later launched Knixwear via a crowdfunding campaign in May 2013, where she sold over $60,000 in high-tech knickers, becoming the most funded Canadian fashion project of all time, which is amazing. She has used crowdfunding, $102,000 in total, to pre-sell product and finance production. She also has a Canadian Youth Business Foundation loan, an operating line of credit, has raised external equity financing from friends and strategic angels, and has won money from business competitions. So she's yet to get the big funder, but she's using all the different aspects to build her business. So she'll be great to talk to us on that. Mark Sales is the CEO of Greyter Water Systems. He's the co-founder and CEO of Greyter Water Systems. His background is a combination of strategic, operational, and financial experience. He's the founder of Clean Tech Network, which has launched businesses in the area of clean air, clean fuel, and water management. He sits on a number of boards and has held various operational positions with early-stage businesses. So he has launched businesses that have been successful in raising capital from strategic investors and through non-dilutive sources of funding, while still maintaining management founder control, including partners that have provided resources for web development. So Mark will really be able to talk about leveraging strategic networks. He's contracted staff and consultants, CFO, engineers to work for equity in lieu of cash compensation, and his spring and summer interns always play an active role from May through August. So again, using interns, this is another one of the tips. His board members and strategic advisors have also assisted his company in bootstrapping through office space, warehouse space, professional services. He's also been the recipient of a number of government sources of funding, including IRAP, OCE, and others for research and development, branding, and other costs. And our last panelist, Mike Betts, is the president of Castlegar Management. Previously, he was the president of Photoglyph, an advertising-supported stock and editorial photography licensing platform, which out of the gate got financing.
Pretty early. Yeah.
Pretty early. But now he works with a number of entrepreneurs for Castlegar Management, which is a Toronto-based advisory services firm. It partners with early and growth stage technology companies and creates solutions that advance business objectives. So with that, I just want to start the panel and just have you maybe take a minute to introduce yourself, a little bit about your road to entrepreneurship and how you thought you were going to fund your company sort of out of the gate and what happened. So we'll start with you, Joanna.
Sure. So my background is in PR and marketing. I'm an accidental entrepreneur. I never had any intention of starting my own business. I actually thought I would work in media for my entire life, but I went back to school in 2011, had this idea in the back of my mind for a couple of years prior, and basically took the opportunity while doing my MBA to go through every kind of test possible with my idea. And much to my surprise, I kept passing every test, where ultimately I kind of had run out of excuses and decided to move forward with the business full time. So Knix is a high-tech women's underwear company. That's not the idea that I started with. It's really what it has evolved into today. And what's interesting, I'd say, about our company, and specifically for today, is that the way that I speak about Knix now, the way that we market the product, all of that insight we learned through our first crowdfunding campaign. So not only was it an excellent way for us to get money, but also to learn about how customers viewed our businesses. So it's an intro so far.
Great.
Yeah, I came into the entrepreneur world really out of an interest to get out of my day job. I was I spent most of my adult life working for Merrill Lynch in Colorado, and it occurred to me that by managing business owners' money that I was on the wrong side of the desk. What's occurred to me now is that they went through a hell of a lot to get to where they were with their successes. It's certainly a battle. But anyway, my background, as was mentioned, is kind of a blend of financial operational experience. In 2008, I established an enterprise called Clean Tech Network that was meant to launch and help operate businesses in the clean tech area. And we've had some failures, and I think we're on the cusp of a great success with Greyter water systems.
Great. And Mike?
I'll say that I'm an accidental entrepreneur. I don't think it was entirely intentional. I found myself running a photography studio very young, and we got into to doing commercial and interactive photography. So if you remember sort of the early days of immersive object photography, and we did a lot of catalog work, and there was a very fun lifestyle business to run, but I didn't find it to be a particularly scalable business, and maybe young and naive, I had sort of delusions of grandeur and wanted to create a very large business. And so we always used to fight with, we always used to have issues negotiating rights around the content that we were producing in the studio, and sort of fell backwards into the content licensing business, which ultimately became Photoglyph and sort of went on from there. So for me, I think I've sort of always fallen from one business to the next business and on. But at this point, I just don't really know anything different.
Great. And back to Joanna, if you could talk a little bit about your crowdfunding campaigns, maybe the pros and cons of crowdfunding from having done 2 campaigns, and what did you learn?
Sure. So the first campaign I launched in May of last year, and that was the way that we decided to launch the business. So in part, it was about financing our first production run. I make a physical product, and working capital is obviously a major concern for our business. And I was going in with a big first production run just based on minimums. I had to make 25,000 pieces, which basically was about $200,000 worth of inventory. So I needed some help in financing that, and crowdfunding had seemed to be an interesting space, a great way to test your idea, to get early product feedback, and to see if there was actually an appetite on the market for my company and the product that I was making before I went out and took this huge financial risk of making 25,000 pairs of something that no one actually wanted to buy. So that was the reason to do crowdfunding. It also in part was because throughout the process of creating Knix and developing the company, I had talked to a lot of people about the idea, and I'd had a lot of people saying, oh, that sounds really cool. I want to buy a pair. I want to do this. And the great thing about crowdfunding is you can kind of hold all of those people accountable to actually follow up on their word. So I figured, especially from the network that I built while doing my MBA, that it was a great opportunity to kind of get everyone rallied around the product and around the idea. So we launched that campaign in May. I will say it wasn't easy. It was probably the most grueling 40 days of my life. And I learned a lot through that campaign. We repositioned the company entirely, which I just mentioned before. We shot our video a week in because it really wasn't working. Totally changed the way that we talk about the company, which is how I continue to talk about it today. And I would say that we ended up getting really lucky because through the low moments of the campaign and the kind of desperation and fighting for every single dollar and trying to get people to buy the product, we ended up kind of making crowdfunding history, so to speak, whereby I saw an opportunity. Instead of trying to get one person to buy one pair of underwear, I thought that I could maybe try and get a company to buy a bunch of underwear. And so in the end, that company ended up being Hudson's Bay. They became our first retail partner. They bought enough product for 18 stores across Canada. And in doing so, we made kind of crowdfunding history, did 150% of our goal. And I would say more importantly than that, we're able to get some awesome news coverage because this had never happened within the retail space. So in traditional terms, if I were to get Hudson's Bay as a customer, and I have them as a customer now, I make the product, I deliver the product, they buy the product, and then 60 days later after I deliver it, I get paid. So the whole kind of cash flow cycle is 120 days. In this case, they paid for the product. I then got to use that money to make the product and then delivered it to them 4 months later. So I guess learning a lot from that campaign made me make the crazy decision to do a second one, which I was going to ask, that was going to be my follow-on question, is what did you learn, even with the first successful one, that you changed when you did the second crowdfunding? Yeah, a lot of things. Okay. So our first campaign, my goal was $40,000. The second campaign, our goal was $15,000. So I recognized the importance of setting your goal low, and especially, I've done both of my campaigns on Indiegogo, but where you can do flexible financing. So if you don't hit 100% of your goal, you can still get the money. But if you are looking at Kickstarter as a platform, it's all or nothing. So that's where you see the 44 million pledged versus the 14 million received. And I think that in my first campaign, I was very overly ambitious about how easy it was going to be to sell $40,000 worth of underwear. In the second campaign, I recognized that actually the lower you set your goal and the quicker that you surpass that goal, the more likely you are to make more money, because strangers who don't know you are more likely to contribute to a campaign if they see that it's successful. So that was one really key learning that I would say coming out of the first one. The second one was just the preparation and the effort that it takes, and really small things, but even around the timing of your campaign and starting on a Monday, ending on a Friday. And in part, I decided to do a second campaign because I found a strategic partner in the form of Lycra, the spandex company. Oh, wonderful. They wanted to partner with us. They wanted to give us some marketing dollars to put against it. We weren't big enough from a product standpoint or a physical distribution standpoint to just justify that money. So I pitched them on doing a second crowdfunding campaign in exchange for the partnership so that they would get visibility and awareness. And in exchange, they gave me the money to develop my latest product line from a research and development point of view. So it was a bit of...
That's incredible.
I've used crowdfunding a couple times in part for the marketing and the opportunities there.
So it sounds like you have a very clear goal each time you do it. Would you do it again? Would you do it a third time?
I would do it a third time. My husband would kill me if he heard me say that. I would do it a third time. I would do it for I would do it for a new product. I'm thinking about launching a men's line, and I would do it for my men's line for sure.
What would you warn entrepreneurs about crowdfunding? Yeah. What are some of the lessons or the story? You must have heard some stories that have happened in the network. What would you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first warning is to be really realistic about the amount of money that you need, definitely, and to set that goal low. Don't just look at another campaign that did $100,000 in sales and set yours at $100,000, because there's not a lot of transparency around crowdfunding, and you don't actually know what's going on behind the scenes. They could hit $100,000 because they personally put in $75K. Like you can't see those things. And so really think about yourself, your network, what you need to be successful for your business, and be realistic in your goal. I would also say to dedicate the time necessary to run a successful crowdfunding campaign. So it really is like 24/7 during the time of your campaign. Every day counts. So don't just, like you were saying before, throw it up there and think that it's free money, because it's not. You have to work really hard for it. And I would also say, I'm trying to think about, the fulfillment piece is huge. So, you know, I think a lot of people look at crowdfunding and they just, you know, if they're smart, they'll think about the planning that goes into a crowdfunding campaign. So they'll look at those 40 or 30 days in isolation. The real work begins when that campaign's over and you actually have to develop a product or a movie, a film, whatever it might be. But you actually have to create it, deliver it. There's so many other costs, like you're talking about cost of fulfillment. I think a lot of companies do get into trouble, and I've heard about companies selling $300,000 worth of underwear and losing money on that.
Well, you always hear with product development, everything takes longer and costs more than you think. So
yes.
I think keeping that in mind when in a crowdfunding to avoid getting in trouble with the fulfillment or the delivery at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. So really be careful and try and map out as many of those costs ahead of time as you can, and have that reflective in your pricing, because it can rack up really quickly.
Don't lowball.
Yeah.
And another thing we hear of entrepreneurs talk a lot about is the importance of network. And I've heard entrepreneurs say they're not going to do crowdfunding because they don't think they have a big enough network, and it's so important than having the network to get the initial. What would you say to that? Did you have a big network? Do you feel like, is it about reaching your existing network or finding a new network? How do you get the word out?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends. The first campaign, I definitely relied heavily on my own network. The second campaign, I didn't, and I didn't want to, because it was about getting new customers. It wasn't about getting, you know, my sister-in-law to buy another 5 pairs of underwear. It was about finding that person in Missouri who like needs my product and getting them to become a passionate customer of ours. So I don't think you need a huge network to make it successful. They do say that, you know, 10 to 25% of the amount that you raise will come from your personal network. And it's definitely important to have the pieces in place to have some early success in your campaign, whether that means lining up media coverage ahead of time, or, you know, tying in your campaign to a trade show that you're doing or a public event and getting people to buy on the spot. It doesn't have to be your social network per se, but you do have to insert yourself into certain kind of opportunities so that people can find out about your campaign. So I would be, you know, recognize that people don't just discover your campaign by putting it on a platform. You have to drive them there. So if you're not going to drive them there because they're your friend on Facebook, you have to figure out new ways to find people to drive them there. Yeah.
And thanks, Joanna. And Mark, can you talk a little bit about how you've bootstrapped? You've used a number of different methods, including strategic partners and government grants. So if you give a couple...
Sure. Okay, well, let me back up just a little bit. I think the first thing before you bootstrap is you got to make sure, to the best of your ability, that you have a product or a solution or service that the world needs or that the world wants. So you got a business plan that can be well executed by a team, because you're not going to be able to do it alone. And you need to get verification from the market, perhaps Mars, the different practices like clean tech in my area, where you verify it. Once you've done that, then I think you're on path to say, okay, I'm going to build this business, and I can do it by really being lean and mean. And so what we've done is we knew out of the gate that, let me just give you a quick background on Greyter water systems. So Greyter's premise is that it's absolutely asinine to be flushing toilets with fresh water, and that we should be reusing water wherever we can, particularly in arid areas, southwest United States, even here in Ontario, to conserve water. So we focus on building solutions that sit in the mechanical room of a school, a condo, a hotel, fire station, captures, treats, so that we can reuse gray water, like shower water, or even rainwater so it can be reused for flushing toilets. Ultimately, it's about an economic benefit to the building owner because we can reduce water consumption by 30 to 40%. The problem we've had, and we knew it, so we were prepared for it, was that this is a market here that's very close to the Great Lakes, 20% of the fresh water, and water rates aren't increasing as rapidly as other places in the world, like the Middle East and Southwest United States, Florida, Georgia, California. So we knew that our audience here in Toronto, the immediate audience, was going to be a challenge, that we had to prove this gradually and slowly. So we said, okay, let's set off looking to raise capital, but at the same time, we got to be nimble and thrifty. And so first thing we did is we said, okay, what do we have personally that it's going to allow us to get through the next 2 years? So first thing for us for bootstrapping was, what are our own cash resources? That was for the 3 founders. And then once we started to progress and we built the business model, we started having some successes with various customers that were marquee, like the US military, the Canadian military, schools. Then we were in a position to actually go to the market. So we had to finance a few things out of our own pockets is the first thing, to be in a position to actually attract the capital. So we attracted the capital from a, what I call a strategic investment. And that was a builder in the York region that has land tied up for the next 20 years that they need to move, and they're going to move it by working with their municipal officials to create water-efficient communities. So they get what we're doing, and we're coming out with a residential product that is highly sought after by this builder. So we were very inclusive. The three founders, we didn't really nickel and dime in terms over equity. We wanted the partner, we wanted them to move fast, and that gave us the capital. So we had a $150,000 investment on the seed side, and that kind of tied us through. Now we are looking to raise a larger amount, but that's proved challenging. It's about $1 million for us. So now fast forward, what have we done to bootstrap? Well, one of my advisors, not a board member, but advisors, is downsizing their space. So put your ego on the line, ask if you can share space. Get in there for a few months, work hard, do what you can to help them. I was an advisory panelist for his company. Now we're paying rent. Now I have a full wing. So that was a great transition for us, but I'm paying $350 for an office that can house the 4 of us. Interns was mentioned earlier. Get on it now because these university grads are looking for internships right now. And many of them are here at schools and are from outside, international students that are looking for unpaid internships. And in our case, we have design engineering internships and technical sales interns. Other things, I can't afford my CFO right now, but I can provide him with some equity. And so my CFO works with us on a part-time basis, but his compensation is really going to be the ultimate payout, the liquidity event. In terms of other things, in terms of bootstrapping is actually impossible, literally. Like you can't pick yourself up by the straps of your boots. So I call this being thrifty and nimble, right? So what can you do to be thrifty and nimble?
It's almost like bootstrapping. You got to be really scrappy and find ways to stretch dollars and get things for free.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. But for example, I don't know if you're familiar with WaterTap, but that's an organization that is implementing the Ontario Water Opportunities Act. That's been a great resource for me in our industry in tapping into resources because they provide grants for branding, for web development, for memberships and associations. It's important for us to get in front of architects and engineers that specify our product within their building. So now with WaterTap support, I've joined these associations. We have continuing education seminars that we can assist and we can do to get in front of our clients, essentially. So leverage the resources that are there from the government perspective to help you. I don't count on it. I think your business should succeed on its own accord. as opposed to relying on government, but you certainly should look to applying when you can and fill out the applications, appropriately.
So I was going to ask a little bit about government grants. How have you found that? Is it arduous to be searching and filling out forms and?
Sure, it's dependent on the company. I mean, if is there anyone in here that has an affiliation with their innovation or technology with an academic institution?
Probably, yeah.
Oh gosh.
Okay,
Get
so
one.
Get one.
So OCE might not be your great partner because it's pretty much academia. And if you're looking, is there anyone that's looking for like a large-scale, multi-million-dollar pilot? Then you shouldn't be looking. Well, we have one or two. Then the rest of us shouldn't be looking at SDTC. These are organizations that are extremely helpful, but they got to fit your niche. So for us, there's things that you can do though. OCE has been helpful to Greyter, even though we don't have an academic affiliation. OCE has an academic affiliation with the University of Guelph on greywater studies, advancing research. So if you can look at different ways and be creative to maybe, if you have R&D that's required, to reach out to the different academia, see if they have money. In the case of a professor that we're working with, they had a couple $100,000 to do a number of things, and a part of that now is working on the filtration side for us.
Great. And Mike, can you speak to what you see when you're working with companies as what's happening with bootstrapping and how you advise them to bootstrap in the very early stages?
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of it comes down to the initial establishment of what you decide you want to go into from a business perspective. I find that some people will go into a venture like a complicated life science concept or a medical device, or go into the web development space without any development skills. People won't necessarily think through the exercise of, well, if I'm going to be in the software business, I need to know how to build software or have somebody as part of my co-founding team who does. There's a lot of assumption of I'll just hire somebody to do that, or I'll raise some money and hire somebody to do that. And I think that those are always, they never prove out to be valid. So a lot of it goes into getting into the kind of business where you can get out in front of generating revenue as early as possible. And I also, just show of hands out of curiosity, who is predominantly a development-oriented person, build technology, build products? Wow, not as many as I would have thought. There's a bunch. Okay, so there's some. Start selling.
Yay, your favorite, you love it. Cold
and
calls.
You know what, it's one of those things that I think a lot of people are afraid of, but it's an incredibly rewarding experience, and nobody will ever be able to sell your business as well as you, because you will care more about it than anyone else. And so the importance of getting out into the market, even if you do have a business that's still got some R&D or some development work left to be done, getting out into the market and talking to the people who will buy your product from you is what leads you to finding the strategic investor. It's what helps you to better understand what you're selling and how you should be talking about it. And so the less time you spend hiding in your office and the more time you spend out talking to potential buyers of your stuff, the better. I think from a bootstrapping perspective, use as much free stuff as you possibly can. Beg, borrow, and steal from an office space standpoint. If you need an office at all, I know a lot of companies now that live on Google Hangout. It's free and it works pretty well. A lot of free software tools to help you sort of cobble together products, particularly if you're in the software space, just to be able to get out and get some early customers and prove it a little bit. But I think like really foundationally, it's about getting into the right kind of business given the skill set. So you had a point in your slide about being able to sell services. Mm-hmm. Some great businesses are born out of, an ad agency that establishes a product that's repeatable for its customers, that it turns into a SaaS play or something like that.
Scratch your own itch. And I know of, and I tell the story a lot, I know of an entrepreneur that goes out, and it's a software entrepreneur, and finds out what the problem is and says he has the solution for that, and actually goes and just builds it.
Yeah, so fake it till you make it.
The fake it till you make it. It takes. I have a question for everybody on the panel. What is the hardest part of bootstrapping? We often hear that it's the team, convincing people to come work in a risky venture. Would you agree with that? Is it funding the product, finding the team, the uncertainty of not knowing how long the initial investment would last? What do you think is the hardest part of bootstrapping?
These days, there's acquiring really good talent for your business seems to be a consistent theme of challenge that people are having. If you're not backed by a brand name VC, sort of the great development talent, as an example, may not come and work for you or may be uncomfortable with working for you. The talent acquisition thing is increasingly an issue. But I think just coming to grips with the fact that running a business is a hard exercise and doesn't come with all the sort of creature comforts and luxuries that perhaps your previous employment did.
There's no clear map.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's all hard. But it's also worthwhile in terms of, I think if you have that motivation to show up tomorrow, that's my motto. Is I just know that if you have again that right business or that right service, that right technology innovation that the world needs, and you can stick to your guns. Bootstrapping's hard, raising capital's hard, operating's hard, sales is hard, credit card debt is not fun.
No.
But at the end of the day, as much as I'm exhausted heading into the weekend, it's all worthwhile.
Exhilarating at times.
That's right. Yeah. I would say that from my perspective, one thing that I think that it has been the hardest challenge, though, has been on the investment side, and that's because you're telling your story over and over again to people who ultimately, when they reject you, because they have to, right? It's either a yes or a no, and if it's a no, there's a huge explanation and rationale. You got to be able to pick yourself up and move on, and not take it too close to vest. And so, try to learn from every meeting you have when you're looking for investment, because it's just going to shape your business plan better. People are going to poke holes, and that's what you want, because eventually, as you become more profitable, you're going to be in a position where people are going to be perhaps lining up to help you explode.
It's a really good question. I think it's hard. My response would be, when it comes to bootstrapping, the hardest thing that I've had to do is really figuring out what to prioritize on and what to take those limited resources, one being money, another one being time, and what to focus on with limited resources, and always weighing the pros and cons. That's the hard thing for me. It's I could spend this money on PR and maybe it'll do this, or maybe I should spend this money on bringing another person on board, or maybe I should spend this money on, it's taking the same $5,000 and trying to think about how they would play out if you were to spend them in a bunch of different ways. And then being comfortable when you make mistakes on how you spent that money. So it's the prioritization piece that's kind of been the most challenging, especially, I will say, when things start to go well. There's even more of a trade-off, I would say, between and also deciding when to stop bootstrapping and to go and do that next piece and sell that next piece, and kind of figuring out if the time is now, or if you can just keep bootstrapping for another 6 months to a year. This is me speaking from experience, or my personal state right now, and how the landscape will change and the realities of those financing terms will change.
So people often talk about bootstrapping as the entrepreneur retains more control over their venture versus if they had gotten VC investment. Is that something that you would agree with? If you haven't taken VC investment, comparing sort of that control to having a full-time job, is that something? Is there a control factor in there? Is it too hard and crazy?
Let me jump into that, because I think that's a good question. I think ultimately, if you're not performing, you're going to lose control anyway, regardless of whether or not you're a 30%, 50%, 60% owner of your company. And so, I've always had the opinion that we need to be inclusive in terms of equity, so you're building the right team. And as long as you're performing, you will have control. I've fought over this with various friends who have who've started businesses and have been successful, who have done it through debt. But I've seen a lot of them actually lose control because they grew, and then eventually when they've run out of money, because they had the capital early, and when they were running out of the money, then they were forced to bootstrap. Then all of a sudden they were not meeting their debt covenants, and now they don't own a cent of that business.
It's always harder to dial it back once it's spent.
Exactly. So I think ultimately, everyone has to use their best judgment in terms of who are those, like what is control. But whether or not I have 20% of my company or 80% doesn't matter to me. It's about making my dollar share worth $10 one day. And who's going to help us really, take this to a $50 million plus company?
I think it's about making sure you have the right investors.
I think so too.
Right.
If you have people who understand your business and understand your vision and are in line with that, then there's no real power struggle necessarily, because everybody's trying to drive the boat in the same direction. I do think that there's definitely a curve between the size of your business and the financial maturity of your business and the time that you take on money and the likelihood that that money will have influence over your operations. The earlier you take it, the higher likelihood there is that you're going to get babysat a little bit. Whereas the later you've taken it and the more proven and established your business is, the more likely that investor's coming in with an understanding that as an operating team, you know what you're doing.
That's a good point.
So
I think it's important to look at the right people. I think that there's a huge, I don't know if anyone up here would agree with me, but at least I read Inc. magazine and I read Mashable and I read TechCrunch, and it's all about like the top 10 VC firms and the amount of money that you've raised and like doing these huge rounds. And I have yet to do a round like that, but I have taken money from some fantastic strategic angel investors who are former entrepreneurs who are just as passionate about what I'm doing as I am, and who have given me full kind of flexibility and who want me to maintain flexibility and freedom because they come from the same place, if that makes sense. So I think that it's all about finding the right people, and I also think the more you can do in the bootstrapping phase to show your capability within your company and your business, the better position you'll be in to be selective to find the right people, depending on your industry, of course, because some industries just require a lot of capital.
So maybe one final thought. What advice would you give the audience on bootstrapping, just before we go to questions? Or it could be, what do you wish you knew? What do you know now that you wish you knew then?
It sounds ridiculous, but sell a broken product. Unless you're selling like medical devices and stuff that relates to health, or maybe like even some clean tech stuff that could blow up. But the sooner you don't people get trapped in this, like, I'm just one feature away from the right thing. It's not true. The sooner you can get out into the market, and the more time you spend talking to customers, the better. It's almost cliche advice at this point, but it's very, very true. Get out and talk to people about your product. I think from my own experience, I spent a little bit too long in the R&D cycle, probably overspent in it. And it was, we survived it, but it was a painful experience. Whereas, folks that I've worked with that have been very successful, they're putting products in the market as quickly as they possibly can, and bootstrapping to get that early acceptance in the space. Yeah,
I would also say that that product that you're getting out, focus on it before you start looking at other products. The one that's generating revenues, build that. And just to touch on where my experience lies there is we are coming out with a residential product, but our focus is on the commercial building side because that's where the revenues is. And so we have to kind of wait on really funding to move that forward. I guess the number one thing I guess I would advise would be, well, I guess two now. Actually, I'll say three. So the second one would be have resources that allow you to really take it to that level that you think you can get it to over time. So if you think it's going to take you 12 months, well, make sure that you have that stamina to be able to absorb that for your family. For us, we figured it was a 2-year process. And then lastly, don't feel afraid to ask people for advice. And you'll be surprised how that leads into introductions and advice that turns into positive things for you.
Great. Joanna?
The advice thing I definitely would agree with. Asking people for help. I've asked everyone I know for help at this point. Get ready for it when we get off the stage. The other piece I would say is this is just from personal experience, do whatever you can to keep your monthly overhead, fixed overhead, as low as possible, because those things can creep up quickly, and it can make the difference between, having 12 months of runway and having 10 months of runway. And especially when it comes to raising financing, I mean, Mark, it sounds like you're in the middle of it right now, but it can take a long time to raise financing, like months and months and months. And so, just do whatever you can to keep that overhead low, so you're giving yourself some buffer room, because it'll take longer than you think.
Great. Thank you so much for the advice. Do we have any questions from the webcast or the audience? If you have a question, please go to the mics just so people on the webcast can hear.
We do have 2 questions from webcast, Keri.
Sure.
The first question is to the entire panel. What was your success rate in sales in a first year? Yeah, that's it.
Did you make sales in your first year?
Well, I mean, I guess when I launched my product, I was in the position to making sales. I quit school, came back, worked on it. I worked part-time while working on my product for 3 months, and then did about 6 months of development once I'd left my job. But I did have sales within my first full year of incorporation. Yeah.
Great.
Well, we founded the company in 2012, June, and about 105,000 in revenue. Our systems range from $10,000 to $12,000 up to $65,000 in price. So we sold about 4 systems in our first year.
Great.
So the question was about success ratio, right?
Yeah, well, sales in your first year.
So I would say from a success ratio perspective, I failed to sell a lot more than I succeeded, but I succeeded enough to stay alive for the first year.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's...
I think if you can sell in the first year, you're doing really good. Most of the entrepreneurs I know, it takes longer than that.
A big chunk of it, too, is about being able to, dust yourself off after you've been, browbeaten by somebody and just go and do it to the next guy down the hall, right? Because it's a very... So, enough to stay alive, but I think the trick is to try and find a way to just stay in the game, keep going.
Great. Gina, is there another question?
There is one more. How are donations from crowdfunding sources treated by Revenue Canada from a tax perspective? Fully taxable or not at all? So
they've recently changed the legislation in August of last year, and I think it depends on what you're selling. But if someone is pledging to buy a good that is part of your business, whether that's an early copy of a CD or a pair of underwear or a prototype of your technology, then technically you're meant to claim it as revenue and treat it as such.
Yeah, I know when I've contributed to crowdfunding, they say this is not, you don't get a tax receipt for it. It's not a...
Was the request about tax receipts or how you treat it as a company?
Well, it was how it's treated as revenue, but
yeah.
from the supporting company side, it's not a donation in the sense that you get a tax receipt, even if you're donating to nonprofit causes, which I often do. Question here?
Are you guys in it for the long haul, or are you looking to exit on each of your businesses? Because I think that's important to consider when either bootstrapping or the pressures you might face from a VC at exiting at 50 mil if that's your number, or their number is 100 mil. And I think that's where the range of taking investment becomes dangerous to your level of control if they have first rights and stuff like that.
Yeah, certainly as we approach the market looking for, in our case, that $1 million, that really would be the requirement for us to hit the projections that I stated earlier, getting into that $50 million range. We need capital to do that. Otherwise, we're bootstrapped. We're going to kind of float along. So any and all investors will be looking for a liquidity event. Typically, the VCs are looking at 3 to 5 years. We're trying to be more strategic, looking for 5 to 7, because we'd like to bring that residential product into the marketplace. So yeah, there's no question that we all envision that there will be a liquidity event one day. Whether or not we're still operating the business, I don't know. But yeah, at this stage, it hasn't been an issue because we haven't raised that capital that's looking for that liquidity event. But I would think there'd be probably a 7-year exit. Probably from our perspective, probably an acquisition by a larger player in the space.
I would say that I'm flexible on that front. The MBA in me entered into an industry where acquisitions and exits are a likely possibility. So at the moment, I'm kind of working my butt off around the clock, and I can kind of foresee myself doing that for another few years, and then I might be really tired. Or I might just, but I'm also not against the idea that this could grow, and at some point I could just be the wrong person to keep running the day-to-day operations of the business as well, and kind of see what happens.
Great. Well, I want to thank you for coming on a day's notice to save our bootstrapping lecture. And actually, it was a great, it gave us a lot of perspective about what bootstrapping is really like. So I think it was a great format. And we are really happy that you came, and we wish your companies and your organizations all the success in the future. Thank you so much.